Join us on our Discord, the Greater Mandala. For access, sign up to the Order of Fire's mailing list.
All right, this is Jack Donovan, and you're listening to or watching PH2T3R Patera, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, C.B. Robertson, author of many fine books and one hell of an electrician, from what I hear. But
we're getting there. We're getting there.
But yeah, so obviously today we are here to discuss books 8 and 9. We just decided to push them together because, we've been doing this for quite a while. I want everyone to get bored with our show now, since we only talk about Plato now for like eight weeks or whatever. But
brings us to 3 too. We did 3 and 4 together. Now we do 8 and 9 together.
Yeah. So I don't know, it'd be like 6 weeks or something, but total. But and I think it's a worthwhile investigation. I'm getting a lot out of it, and I would actually say, I'll let you do your normal summary before we get into like the nuts and bolts of everything. But compared to some of the other books of this, it's such a mixed bag. Some of the other books are tedious and kind of autistic, and then this one, at least 8 specifically, I thought was really, like, I feel like I want to go back to it several more times, and really, because there's more to pull out it. Like, you could pull so much metaphor out of the bees and the drones and the stuff that they're doing with stuff. And I'm like, I really would need to sit down and think about that like 2 more times to really get it, But the broad strokes, obviously, I was listening to it this afternoon, and I got that. I'm enjoying a lovely a Pimm's Cup today. This is Pimm's Cup Day. Not a lot of people know what these are unless you're British. But it's a specialty British drink. It's like drinking really nice iced tea with a little bit of alcohol, and it's not very much. I usually put gin in it because to make it a little more punchy. But I'm not right now because I have to try and be smart for an hour or 2. But no, it's like it all started because I guess we got some fresh cucumbers. Which out of our garden, which I didn't even know were growing. I don't pay attention to whatever he does out there, but we have fresh cucumbers and fresh mint, and I'm like, you know what, that goes in a Pim cup, and I'm like, okay, well that's what I'm getting. So
there you go.
So that's kind of a cool thing. So anyway, but yeah, why don't you get started and give us your kind of overview of books 8 and 9. I know you're really excited about getting to book 10 too and doing a wrap up. Because you jumped ahead, but take us through books 8 and 9 and tell us what we're talking about.
Sure. Well, I hope anyone else who's following along is getting a sense of things clicking together. Maybe other things that seem strange or ambiguous suddenly coming together. Because we ended with book 7 with this very strong sense that maybe this wasn't a metaphor after all. Maybe this was some weird pacing and leading where, we introduced the Just City as a thought experiment, but this really could happen in real life. And we were just describing the nature of the Philosopher King and how he would be educated and how it was important for the Philosopher King to focus on transcendent and eternal things like mathematics. And then right away at the introduction to book 8, we're basically told by Socrates, but of course, this city wouldn't last forever. Right. Basically, there's this very strange mathematical explanation as to why its collapse would be inevitable. Something about people breeding in not the right season, but I didn't track that at all. I was completely
okay. Well, that's in my notes. We'll discuss that as we go on. But go ahead.
Okay. So basically, he with the permission of the audience, walks through the process of degradation from the pure just city, which we're told is like the royalist or monarchist kind of just society, down through the different stages of degradation. And it has a very specific order. First, he describes the degradation of the royal just society into a timocracy or a timarchy. which is basically a rule by honor. And it's you have these very thumotic warrior kings that are competing for honor. And the diagnosis is that this comes about from an imbalance in the gymnastic and musical education. There's too much gymnastics and not enough music, and so you get these guys that are not. It's sort of a throwback to, I want to say, like book 5 or 4, where they describe it that we need this balance. And so the democracy isn't so bad, but there's contention. There's competition within the city for honor. And the love of wealth emerges in the society. And the love of wealth, which is taken as sort of a sign of honor, an indication of honor, leads to the second stage of regulation, which is oligarchy. And oligarchy is, we're, I think, much more familiar with the term oligarchy than we are with democracy. An oligarchy is, of course, the rule by the wealthy, and this is bad for all the reasons that we were associated with understanding it to be bad. And he says, basically everybody is a pauper in society who isn't wealthy. It's a funny description. And from the oligarchy, he describes how the logic of oligarchy leads to a democracy. The love of wealth creates a people who are, and there's at each stage, it's not just Plato takes great pains to explain the psychology of the timarchic man, or the oligarchical man, or the democratical man. So just as this whole investigation from book 1 forward, or book 2 forward, I should say, is like, let's explore the justice in a man by means of the justice in the city. There's this sense in which we're getting a sense of the personality of the man. Really, it's about the man, not the city. The city is just sort of an illustrative guide through these stages of degradation of the individual. And so there are familial psychological explanations, like, a man who is in a timarchy. His wife thinks he is not ambitious enough and not fighting for more money, and so she tells his son that he's only half a man, and so the son comes up with more ambition for money, and he becomes an informer. He becomes a corrupt bureaucrat, and the familial. It's like we completely threw away female equality from the earlier stages of the book, and we're just working on an assumption of normal human psychology here again, which was amusing. And so the oligarchic society gives way to a democratic society, and then the passage of the democratic into the tyrannical society is maybe the most poignant and interesting one. He says basically, the people, because people give themselves so much license and so much freedom and have so much entitlement, they'll basically go after all the rich people and saying they're corrupt and they're friends of oligarchy. And the rich people who were actually not friends of oligarchy will by necessity be forced to actually become friends of oligarchy. And so a tyrant will emerge who is at first a friend of the people, who is at first all smiles and kindness, but then over time, and there's this very strange mythical allusion to the eating of human flesh and becoming a wolf or a werewolf or something to that effect. Just kind of thrown in the middle of connecting the tyrant to this wolf-like character. And then the psychologizing of the tyrant and his origins is really saved for book 9. But just depicting not just how the society will degrade, but the inevitability of its degradation, I think, first of all, it puts the nail in the coffin of any literal interpretation of the Just City. It's I don't see how it would be possible for anyone to read book 8 immediately after reading book 7, where it says, the philosopher king focuses and is not bothered by the many things, the particular things, but the pure and the absolute and the true things, the forms.
Right.
And then to immediately say, oh, and by the way, this city, this is not one of those forms. This is the actual city would have to degrade over time. So even if you accept his argument, I think any literalism sort of dies in Book 8. But perhaps there is some argument to save the forms for literalists. We'll get to that in a little bit. But so we sort of continue straight from Book 8 into Book 9 with the psychology of the tyrant, who is his tyranny. What it culminates in is his tyranny is defined by behavior where he'll even abuse his own parents, and he would throw away his mother for some harlot that he just met, or he would
or a boyfriend. It's explicit about that as well.
And he would abuse his father and even use force against his father to take his wealth and property. And so we
sure, the young Soros comes to mind. No.
There's a lot to say about the young Soros.
Yeah. I just popped in my head.
Yeah. So it was, but in Book 9, you also get. It was interesting because we conclude the psychologizing of the tyrant, and then we get into, in many ways, we get the pinnacle of the explicit, clear delineation of his ideas of the forms, and as it was sort of alluded to in earlier books where we were sort of primed to hear this. We were even, hearing from the philosopher kings about, or in the education of the philosopher kings about the focusing on the true and the absolute and so forth. But here we actually get the sort of classical explication of this idea with reference to, the table, which is sort of the classical example. There's one true table, and it would be impossible for there to be more than two pure true tables with this sort of metaphysical interpretation.
Right.
So,
well, that kind of takes it back to what I thought the forms were in the first place. Okay, here's this magical. Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better about it, because I was like, we had some questions last week. I'm like, but that's always the way I perceive the forms as being. Like, there's this idea of a table,
right?
Perfect, the perfect table. Yeah. So one of the things that jumped out at me was, you mentioned it earlier. He talks about the way that the society degrades, the perfect society, the perfect city degrades, and it's all very weird. And it's that's that weird argument about breeding. Like the breeding doesn't work or whatever. Like the people have sex with the wrong people. And I think that it's someone else's argument, if I'm not mistaken, about what should be done. But in the context of understanding the man, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? That was one of the things that jumped out at me. I'm like, because I don't think they really go back and explain how that pertains, this failure of breeding pertains to how the man changes from being in the perfect, philosopher king kind of mindset to going into the timocracy.
Yeah.
Like the failure of breeding seems like a weird non sequitur. Like for that, I mean, you can see why he would say that in terms of a city, but in terms of a man, like what happened? Does he have the wrong influences? Like what is breeding? How does that metaphor work out?
Yeah. I mean, the two possible interpretations that jump to mind, and I have 30% confidence in either of these, so take this with a grain of salt and add your own to this. But on the one hand, it could be interjecting sort of the real world phenomenon of entropy within an actual city to sort of blow apart people taking the metaphor too literally. So to say, look at what happened with. I mean, we're not at the stage where Sparta actually collapsed, but for people who know a little bit about the history of Sparta, Sparta is one of the only nations in the world that eventually collapsed from insufficient immigration. It was so insular, and the rules pertaining to its ruling class were so strict that its ruling class actually dwindled in size till it was basically nothing. And they had no new they didn't have that gadfly to spark more life and energy into their society. They basically stagnated to death. Almost no other societies suffer that fate. That's normally they go the other way.
Right.
But it feels like he's just using mathematics in a human context to imply a sort of inevitable decline. That's one possible interpretation. Another possible interpretation is if you listen to certain kinds of like call-in therapy shows, like the Stefan Molyneux shows from like the 2014 era. John Deloney does this today on like Dave Ramsey's channel. Like figuring out people's problems by means of sort of unearthing childhood traumas or experiences of that nature. I think we've reached a point today in 2024 where it's been kind of overdone, but maybe there's some metaphorical use there. It's like, oh, there's some problem in the family that leads to a degradation of the soul down the road. Perhaps. Yeah. Again, low confidence with both of these interpretations, but they're possibilities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I found his explanation of how you mentioned it as far as how it degrades into timocracy, like borderline almost like Freudian or something, a very like psychological, like, oh, well, his mother won't think he's powerful enough, his father is more powerful enough, so she'll kind of tell him that his dad's a pussy, and then that you should be more ambitious and like make him fired up, and then that's what turns him into like a great man of honor, which is kind of I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, but that seems like an odd path to take. Usually it's a strong paternal influence is what, like, I'm trying to please dad, and I become very like associated with honor.
Or it's a really highly elevated and strong father who is absent, who is not there, or is not giving enough affirmation to the son.
Right.
And so the son then tries to live up to and honor their absent father for the affirmation to earn that affirmation they never got. That I think would be a more sort of conventional psychoanalysis of maybe an Andrew Tate type character. Yeah.
Like but I mean, because someone thinking their dad is weak can go either way.
Mm-hmm.
It can go either way. Like, my dad is weak, so it's a different kind of. It can create a variety of daddy issues. If they think their dad is weak, so or just not ambitious enough is kind of a different thing. And the other thing is that almost kicks it down. You can see that working with ambition more. Like, your dad doesn't. Your dad's poor, and we should be rich. Like if you were more ambitious, you wouldn't be poor. That actually, but that would be a different stage of the society that would kick it to, not the society of like the more militaristic,
doesn't
like
he
honor-based
describe
society.
Doesn't he describe that in the Democrat isn't there? That's the timocratic to the oligarchic man. Whereas the man of honor who gets ruined by an unjust society and loses all his wealth. And so the son says, well, I'm going to be super wealthy. And basically restore them. And there you get not an Alex Soros, but kind of a George Soros.
Right.
In that case.
And when there's an interesting thing with that kind of transition too, about when we read like the Rig Veda and so forth, like they're praying for like wealth and victory at the same time.
Right.
And what imagines that's those two things are pretty closely tied together, which is makes he kind of portrays it in that kind of way. Wealth and victory, like all these rating societies, because we're talking about basically rating societies. We're talking about the Homeric societies. I mean, those were basically rating societies.
Time is honor in the form of booty, essentially.
Right, which is how we get timocracy. I had to make sure where that word came from, and that's what it gave me as the root. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I was like Tim, but what's all this about Tim? But but yeah, no, it comes from Time. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these societies that are going after victory are also going after wealth at the same time. Like they go and they take their trophies and their booty and whatever, and then the good king distributes the booty to all the people who participated. Where you're talking about Vikings or like the Vedic warriors or all these raiding societies, like the good king distributes the wealth.
So then the shift from the timarchy into the oligarchy is like less a shift in external demonstration of value, but it's a shift in psychology as to why are you pursuing wealth? Are you pursuing wealth because it demonstrates how honorable you are, or are you pursuing wealth kind of for its own sake? And the oligarchical man is actually, if not a coward, then at least he's not particularly concerned about honor. And he's not going to run into fight necessarily where honor's on the line. It's about the money. Whereas the timocratic man, anyways, I don't know how you conjugate that definitively, but the timocratic man is like he wants wealth because it shows how honorable he is. It's the proof of his value.
Which there's so many parts in this that I can't figure out what stage we're at in Platonic, like in the Platonic progression, because this chapter 8 specifically, like book 8 specifically, is quotable the whole way through about problems with government, but our society has all of them. So it's like I'm like which one? I mean, and that's the thing with these systems is that people try to fit the situation to the system rather than like evaluating the system as it's functioning at right now. Here's what's happening right now versus like, okay, that was a system that's theoretical. Let's not over apply that. But there's just a lot of great quotes as to like the things that are happening now.
Go ahead. It reminds me of the Greg Nage's explication of Hesiod's works and days generations. We've got earlier we heard the gold population, the silver population in our just city, but in Hesiod's works and days, and Hesiod was a contemporary of Homer and a poet. So I don't know if we're supposed to censor him or not, if we're going to invoke his tools here. But Hesiod describes the generations of man. He's sort of the father of or at least the first explicator in writing of the like generational cycle theory. The sort of good men create good times, create bad men, create bad times. Like that cycle is Hesiod. It's his gold, silver, bronze, iron, nameless generations.
Right.
And this cycling. And what Greg Nage points out, because Hesiod gives these long descriptions of the psychology of these types, Greg Nage says these are the gold generation are the positive qualities of cult heroes, and the bronze generation are the negative qualities of cult heroes. The silver generation are the positive qualities of cult adherents, of cult practitioners, of citizens, and the iron generation shows off all the negative qualities, so the worst versions. And so what you see in any story is all the characters have all the traits. Achilles is gold and he is bronze. These cult practitioners are silver and they are iron. All of the generations are in each literal generation. And I think it's the fact that Socrates was saying, and you'll see this in an oligarchic societies, and Glaucon will say, I am very familiar with that. I've seen it outside. But he'll say the same thing about another society, like the timocratic or the democratic. They're, of course, living in the Athenian democracy at the time of this writing. So one gets the sense that not only are we living through all of these different phases at once, but perhaps they were living through all these phases at once 2,400 years ago as well.
Right. Which kinds of, just degrades the value of the system to a certain extent. Let's say we're just talking about different characteristics that are happening at the same time, different people. And that's where it is interesting, because we're talking about different kinds of men. Mm-hmm. And different, if we take it back to talking about different stages of men, it makes more sense than talking about different stages of government, because those things don't always go together in the same way that they're describing. It's a nice just so story, but like those things don't actually always happen in that way. It's as you mentioned. I actually thought of the whatever bad times create strong men, whatever metaphor, statement as well. While I was listening to this, and it seems like another attempt to create like, this is what happens, and then this is what happens, and this is what happens, and it's like it doesn't really necessarily happen that way. As you said with Sparta, it happened a different way, and like with our society, one of my notes that I think I wrote down, I'm going to freestyle with it without looking at it, but I was thinking about oligarchy and so forth, and like the pure valuation of money, like the people that become in power in oligarchy, because he's talking kind of positively about the people who come to power in oligarchies. And what I wanted to bring up was that according to that book on human universals, I think Donald Brown title, but according to that book on human universals, oligarchy is actually the human universal form of government. Like that's the one that we always that's what's actually happening. Like, and it's an ugly truth, but I believe it. Like that's how shit actually runs. And the thing is that normally that would make a lot of sense in terms of, if you're a landowner who is running multiple things, multiple areas of land, multiple companies, multiple investments, multiple things across the board, you're actually a fairly competent individual, and your skill is management. And to have you managing society as well is not really that big of a stretch. I mean, in America, that's like, we've kind of unfortunately elevated shoe salesmen like the people who are best at selling rather than people who are best at managing. The idea that
at like a mid-level of wealth, which to guys like us is like already obscenely above our heads in terms of the numbers, but then you get a guy like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they're not just salesmen,
Well, yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like America elevates salesmen because you have to sell yourself to the people, and that's what they're good at. Whereas the like master like managers who are really doing stuff behind the scenes are not maybe as much interested in being public figures, or are not as interested in selling, but they're big idea guys. So they hire people to sell for them. Whereas like the presidential candidate has to be kind of a personality and be a salesman. So that's kind of the difference. And I was thinking of that in terms of, some of the problems with, the way our society is oriented. And I've always said, this is one of my criticisms of like, I don't want to say capitalism because that's almost a meaningless word, but the way ours is set up in terms of like the stock market and the way that things like that work. I mean, there's so much focus on short-term investment and short-term gain rather than like a long-term gain. Whereas like when you had monarchs, there's like a long-term investment because there's legacy.
Yes.
And then and if you have like your Andrew Carnegie type, like robber baron kind of, those guys wanted their names on buildings and they wanted to like create a legacy. And it was the same thing. But now you have people who, some of the wealthiest people, we don't even know who they are. And they just kind of like run shit. And because they're doing short-term thing, buying out companies, this one sucks, let's buy it and turn it into this one. Like they're doing that kind of. It seems a lot more oriented towards short-term investment. Even the way that our society is just oriented that way. Like even the way that people buy houses, people buy houses to like to flip them. You
So
know?
can I read a short poem that I think is a transition from exactly the point you're
Okay.
talking about
Yes.
to? It's a poem by Ezra Pound, so who's a bit of a controversial figure in some circles, but
Sure.
it's called Usura or Canto something, and it's about usury, and I feel
Yes.
like it touches in with the oligarchical man, but it's like a segue into this conversation about the forms that we get into in book 9 and who
Right.
is happier, and is the philosophical man really 727 times happier than the tyrant? But we'll get into that in a minute. Ezra Pound writes, with Usura hath no man a house of good stone, each block cut smooth and well-fitting, that design might cover their face. With Usura hath no man a painted paradise on his church wall, harpes et luz, or where virgin receiveth message, and halo projects from incision. With Usura seeth no man Gonzaga his heirs and his concubines, no picture is made to endure, nor to live with, but is made to sell, and sell quickly. With Usura, sin against nature, is thy bread evermore of stale rags? Is thy bread dry as paper, with no mountain wheat, no strong flour? With Usura, the line grows thick. With Usura is no clear demarcation, and no man can find site for his dwelling. Stone cutters kept from his stone, weavers kept from his loom. With Usura, wool comes not to market. Sheep bringeth no gain with Usura. Usura is a murrain. Usura blunteth the needle in the maid's hand, and stoppeth the spinner's cunning. Pietro Lombardo came not by Usura. Duccio came not by Usura, nor Pier della Francesca. Zuambellin not by Usura, nor was La Calunia painted. Came not by Usura Angelico, came not Ambrogio Predis, came no church of cut stone signed Adamo me fecit. Not by Usura Saint Trophime, not by Usura Saint Hilaire. Usura rusteth the chisel, it rusteth the craft and the craftsman. It gnaweth the thread in the loom, none learneth to weave gold in her pattern. Azure hath a canker by Usura, Carmois is unbroidered, emerald findeth no memling. Usura slayeth the child in the womb, it stayeth the young man's courting, it hath brought palsy to bed, lieth between the young bride and her bridegroom. Contra naturam, they have brought whores for Eleusis. Corpses are set to banquet at behest of Usura. And it's describing the corruption that, it's not just money. There's a reading of this where Ezra Pound says, this is so misunderstood. Usury is not just interest. Usury is not just charging interest on things. Usury is charging for the privilege of the usage of money, which is different. And it leads to shifts in perception. And I think when what we see in book 9, which is the conclusion of the psychology of the tyrant, and suddenly shifts into this talk about the forms and the true thing, as opposed to these images and these discrete things, connected to these psychologies of these various oligarchical and timocratical and democratical and tyrannical men, is a psychology of misperception. And the person I was talking with this poem about, it occurred to me sort of as I was describing this, like, this is how people buy things sometimes. Suppose you are going to buy a car, and you've got 5 men who are going to buy a car. One man is an auto mechanic. One guy is Andrew Tate. One guy is whatever the top Rothschild is right now. I don't know who that is, but like one of these super wealthy guys. And the fourth guy is fill in the blank with your democratic man, and then the fifth is your tyrannical man. Like, the mindset of how, and suppose they choose cars based upon the psychology of these 5 categories. You can easily imagine, the auto mechanic is going to choose his car based upon the mechanical excellence of the design. Like, there's a he's like, I care about how well the engine is made. So he might go with a Porsche 911. I'm not a car person. I'm just like throwing out something I've heard that mechanics like. So I'm not the philosopher king of cars here.
Right.
But
Right.
but what's the psychology that would cause someone to choose, for example, a Bugatti? Is the sort of person who buys a Bugatti like just enamored with the details of the design of the engine, or are they getting it as a status symbol? Are they a step removed from excellence, from the sort of truth of the thing in itself? And we have this wonderful illustration at the oh no, that's in book 10. I'm sorry, I will not go there just yet. Jumping ahead of myself there a little bit, but like that's where we talk about images and stuff. So there's a way to read all this psychologizing of the different kinds of men who are represented by these different ways of running a city as sort of degrees of separation from the truth. And this truth isn't necessarily a metaphysical truth, like not like what is real in the world, but more close to the question of where is happiness, which was the question which started this whole interrogation. Was who is happier, the just man or the tyrant? And Socrates says, oh, the tyrant is 727 times or 725 times less happy than the whichever one is 3 times 5 to, or 3 times 3 to the 5th power. Someone can do the math for me, I'm sure. But like what he's describing are degrees of separation from like true value. Because if you think about it, honor is sort of it's a stand-in for value. And money in the form of time is a stand-in for honor. And then, you go down the way, democratic popularity is a sort of stand-in for time. And then just sensuous pleasures are below even that. I don't even know if those are stand-in for anything. That's just, he would say, slavery to one's desires. Or maybe a better way of putting that is addiction, which is maybe a little bit more emotionally punchy in a day of an age of quick pornography and street drugs.
Right. So, I think what he actually said was the most unhappy was like there's the personality who can be a tyrant.
Oh, yes.
But the most unhappy is the tyrant who actually finds the opportunity to become one. Mm-hmm. Like he's actually like, because there's plenty of like would-be tyrants in the world.
The petty tyrants, yes.
Yes, but the ones who are actually like empowered to like do the thing are probably the most unhappy of all, in the sense of which makes sense. Like they're obviously always looking over their shoulder, waiting to get assassinated, and living in like a permanent state of stress. And
the depiction is that their own senses and desires are at war with each other. And you get a sense of this in his psychologizing of the democratic man, and they're almost entertaining of it. They're almost like there's something charming about the man who wants to be a monk for this period, and then decides to drink for a little while, but then decides to give up drinking to lose weight for some period of time.
That's like normal society. Like I was thinking about it. I mean, in terms of our society. That's something I've talked about in the context of like the empire of nothing. Mm-hmm. And the thing that it's not that any of that is bad. I mean, that's almost like what I've joked about is
they even say it would be quite charming for a time.
Well, I mean, I've often called it the Joe Rogan syndrome, because that used to be whatever dudes were into on whoever Joe Rogan had on a guest, all of a sudden that like everybody was into that whatever thing. You know, like if someone had paleo, like everybody was paleo that week or whatever, like it just became like whatever Joe Rogan was into then and had on the show, that was what all the dudes were all of a sudden like, I need to do that. And you see that with Twitter culture. I mean, they famously sun your balls. Like you could just put something out there and all the guys will do it. And so you have that out there. And that's something that happens. But also in the sense of, the government putting out propaganda to influence the things that you'll like. Marketing was doing it before that. I mean, well, they've both been doing it for a long time. But, these external influences kind of, I've described it as plankton. You're basically like floating on the wave of like whatever like comes by, and this is where you go depending on whatever the wave comes through. And so if everybody's like taking ice baths, then get on the ice bath wave, and everybody gets on that. And it's very human and normal to a certain extent. Like I always question how much we need to pathologize things that are like functionally normal. Like, okay, a lot of people are doing this, I guess I'll do it right now. I mean, that's not bad. But I mean, that's just normal. Like that's what people do. But at the same time, I think the important part is to have some kind of center. Like this is what actually I believe.
And to know where the boundaries are. Yeah,
to have some boundaries that you're not going to cross. And I just I've talked about this a little on Instagram recently and whatever. Like to have some kind of like, well, who do I want to be? Because what they're describing as the democratic man really has no center or identity, and which is very, very much our society right now. You don't have any center or identity, so like whatever comes by is what you do. And then, well, that's not working, I'll just do this other thing. And that's not working. And you don't really stick with anything for a long time. I mean, I've talked about it with fitness, too. Like, there's so many people who are like, they'll try on their new fit thing, like, all the time. I'll do this, and we'll do this. I'm like, but nothing ever changes. They always look the same. And the reason why is because, well, bro, you didn't need, like, the 35 trends you just tried. You needed to do one thing consistently for, like, 6 months or 8 months or a year. Yeah. You know, like it's like a fat guy trying to lose weight, but trying a different diet every 3 weeks. He's not actually going to lose any weight. And that's the thing is that I guess the criticism I think of that democratic man that they're describing, which they also kind of described as colorful, which I thought it was hilarious that I'm like, are you describing, I don't know, a rainbow society? It's a little too on the nose for being quite that old. You mean a rainbow society? Okay. It's kind of, I thought that was kind of funny. And I would actually say in that vein, Book 8 actually probably made me laugh. I won't say full out loud laughing like maybe Nietzsche does, but like enough of like enough little chuckling like, okay, that's kind of funny. I see what you're doing there. That's probably more than any other chapter that we've read so far, aside from my all-time favorite line, which is perhaps will refuse to be persuaded, which I'm going to use in real life all the time.
The sort of inside references and like very sly humor throughout Plato.
Yes.
It would be shocking if anyone picked up on it on their first time reading through. But it's one of the things that the more times you read through it, the more you begin to pick up. And like I was saying at like the first talk, it's like if you're not grasping the unbelievable humor just like layered upon itself, it's almost a prank of a book in many ways, but it's dealing with a serious subject at the same time. But if you aren't seeing the humor and the cleverness and the ironic self-contradictions, you're not fully grasping it.
You might be mid.
It. or you just, or you maybe just haven't read it enough because you can digest in one time through.
No, I mean, it's certainly not. I just mean in terms of like, if you can't see any humor in it, like, and you're reading it as a handbook I mean, the way that people actually read it was like, this is a handbook for fascism. And that's, like, if you're reading like that, you might be mid. Like, that's not or maybe just autistic or something. Like, you're not understanding jokes. Like, you're missing jokes. It's a weird thing, and humor and just funny things about human nature that are throughout it. Yeah.
Yeah, including the return of female nature in book 8.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the view of the forms as not as metaphysical truth, but as truth in value that is perceived by pursuit of discrete things, which actually is pursued by essentially minding your own business and by doing your own job and maybe not being so concerned with the task of a city that is going to be corrupted anyways. It opens a path to the experience of the good stuff in life. And it reminds me of one of my favorite philosophical lines in a novel. There's I probably brought it up already, I don't remember, but there's this book by Robert Pearson called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and he has this line where he says, some people want to fix the world through through policy and politics and cultural changes. They want to fix the world, they want to save the world. I just want to fix this motorcycle. We'll see who does the world better between the people who want to fix the world and the people who want to fix the motorcycle. Right. I think overall, on the whole, the people who fix the motorcycles make the world much better than the people who try to fix the world. And it feels like we're getting a taste of that here because one of the themes, not so much in the Republic, but in other conversations about politics and power, is power is treated as this. Actually, no, it was brought up in book 2. Power can be thought of as a kind of an appetite that can never be filled, and an almost sexual thing. This kind of lust for power that is corrupting, and which it's Lord of the Rings here as well. And this is sort of where Gaiji is one of the first things he does when he gets the ring that gives him power is he has sex with the queen and he can take whoever he wants. But it's a sort of metaphorical distortion of perception of the good. And so basically the whole point of Socrates' argument is, how can you really be happy if you don't even understand what is good in the world?
Right. A few thoughts that I had about like the philosopher king and that society, whatever. And it struck me that they were, I thought the degradation of it as being a, like, they didn't have enough music and argument at the same time. I thought that was it. I thought that was clever. Like, what is that? Like, what we really need to fix things is music and argument at the same time. But
gymnastics and yeah.
But I mean, it seems as though the problem with philosophers, generally speaking, is that they would be terribly indecisive rulers. I mean, people who are philosophically inclined, I consider myself one of them. Not in the mathematical way that you are, but like in the I don't know. There are many ends here. Like even a wizard can't see all ends. I'm very like There's a lot more going on here than just this simple thing. But sometimes the people who are really good at business are really good at just being like, we're going with this. This is what we're doing. Let's go.
Yeah.
And they move fast. Like that's people who are good at that. And so like good rulers are like that too.
Pertaining to conflicts from a couple of years ago, Douglas Murray was talking about the problem with combining governance with, for instance, science, which was once a sub-branch of philosophy, is that science derives its legitimacy from an openness, a willingness to change its mind and to follow the evidence and to even say, oh, that thing we thought yesterday, it's totally wrong, turns out. And indecisiveness in a final sense is actually a source of its integrity to its own ideals. Whereas with governance, you need finality. or you can't have objectivity in arbitrating disputes. You have to have a single rule in order for there to be any stability in your society. And so if you combine science with the governance of the state, you kind of get the worst of both worlds. You get the indecision of science destroying the sort of finality of governance that's required for stability and for a feeling of justice in the society, and the decisiveness of the governance, which we might have some experience with now, forces a sort of obtuse, what's like a closedness to new ideas within science, which destroys the legitimacy of science. Right. They just don't play well together, and I think that's true with philosophy and politics. I don't see how you could call yourself a philosopher while making like final pronouncements in that way, and vice versa. How are you going to be a governor of any society that's going to last and work if you're going to be always open to new ideas and entertaining new things and trying new things and stuff? Yeah.
Well, that's, I think, the criticism that Book 8 levels at democracy and the society of equality, the rainbow society, is that there's an inability to say no to anything. And that is one of the main criticisms that, like, you know, the right or whatever has had about our society now. It's like there's no ability to say too far. Like, I mean, right. We're seeing a little bit of it right now, finally. But there was a long time where people were going like, there were no boundaries. They were like, there was no too far. And people would just keep going, okay, well, that's okay too. Well, that's okay too. Well, that's okay too. Well, that's okay too. And then they started messing with the kids. And I think that people got a little bit weird. Like, okay, well, hold on. That's too far. But for everything else, people were like, well, no. They couldn't really say that nothing was too far. And so if you don't have those boundaries where you, at some point, you say no. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can have a fairly liberal mindset within your society, and not liberal in the dumb fucking CNN way, but like liberal in the general, like more philosophical way of like, this, not all these things are necessarily hard stops. You know, like like I say, best practices over like hard rules, but you have to have some hard rules. Like you have to have some like, because otherwise, in the way that like the first men, like we don't have Christians in the first men or Muslims or any other people, because it would make it something else. You know, like you have to have it, if something is everything, then it's nothing. It has no definitions. And that's, you need that for society. You need that as a man too. You have to have some, like, what are you about? What are your boundaries? If there are none, you're not about anything. And you're like the democratic man. You're basically like, whatever comes along is what I'm going to do. You know, and that's no way to really be. I don't know how that influences happiness. Happiness is this weird thing, or you know, like satisfaction in life or whatever. But I mean, I think that, like, I made a reel about this, which is too sentimental, and I'm not going to post it. But I've always liked Sinatra's song "My Way," because you have this guy, he gets to his end of his life, and he's looking back and he's like, well, you know, I did the best that I could. And I did the best that I could, and I did it the way that I wanted to do it. And it didn't always work out the way I wanted it to, but like I did what I wanted to do, the way that I wanted to do it, to the best of my ability at that time. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything better that you can say about your life. Like, really, by the time you get to the end, like, if you're like, well, you know, not everything went the way I planned, but like I tried really hard and I did the best I could do. And I made choices that I'm comfortable with most of the time, you know, like, and that's what you want to be able to say.
Well, and I think there's a way that Socrates, or Plato rather, is actually essentially arguing for that. The royalist, the king, the philosopher king, is the decision maker who is autonomous over himself. And every stage down is another layer of slavery to something that is other than what you necessarily believe is best. So the timocratic man is by degree, slightly bound to conventional notions of honor in his society. And maybe the philosophical man will choose some form of honor, but that might run afoul of some other people's notion of honor. But then there's still something honorable there, literally. But below that, there's money, and the necessity and money beyond necessity, and the law of necessity that we keep hearing brought up, all the way back to the society of necessity in book 2, the first city. And then below that, the opinion of the public, which is sort of the democratic world. And then finally, the tyrant is essentially a Hunter Biden, just completely enslaved to his own whims. And if you've ever met someone who is a serious addict, like, they do what they want in the palest, ghostliest sense of want. Like someone who is picking up, who is selling, who's like stealing catalytic converters so that they can buy more black tar heroin. If you ask them, are you living the life you want to live? They're not going to say yes.
Right.
They're doing what their body is essentially forcing them to do.
Yeah, it's a compulsion is the best way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what the psychology of the tyrant is describing is the man who is completely controlled by his impulses in that way. Yeah. And so what you get in the man who is like the just society is a man who is in harmony with himself, and who has there was this debate I was going back over listening to Dan Dennett defending his concept of free will. And he says the libertarian notion of free will, which is the ability to do otherwise, was always an illusion. That was never the point. The point of free will was its responsibility, and it's an accomplishment. It's something we achieve. And when we say, oh, this person signed this document of their own free will and are therefore responsible for the things, the fact that they might have been predetermined to do that through a mechanistic universe is completely irrelevant, because they've achieved a certain degree of agency and autonomy in their own lives, that their decision is meaningfully theirs. And I think that seems to be what Socrates is arguing for, is this ability to own your own life and your own decisions through achieving a sort of harmony with the body. And so Seneca says, it's looking like neither the just man nor the tyrant are happy. Maybe the point is that we are not capable of lasting happiness and there are better pursuits. Well, maybe lasting happiness is not possible, but I do think Plato is saying, no, really the guy who achieves agency through philosophy and discarding the images of value proffered by these different forces in society in pursuit of the real thing actually is happier.
He may have refuted it right after, but he did this thing. I think it was in chapter 8. It might have been in chapter 9. But I've caught this over the years. Dudes do this all the time. It's rare that they don't. And that magically, he said it like, wouldn't you say that a warrior thinks the best thing to be is a warrior? And basically, he goes down the thing. And I'm like, man, I have observed that so many times. That's one of my iron rules of masculinity, is that 99% of the time, an account will make an explanation of why it's the most masculine thing you could do. And every man down the line will say, well, actually, I do construction and we build things, and building things is more important than and they will say true, why. And he says with no bias. Just from a place of pure reason. But and really what he's doing as a philosopher is saying that being a philosopher is the best thing to be, and so it's just really the same personal bias towards the things that I like and care about the most that are really it's almost like I can be kind of sly with it or whatever, like being crass. Oh, really? A philosopher said that the best way of life is to be a philosopher. Tell me more. Like shocking. Like I mean, it's such a convention of humans and the way that they think.
Yeah.
Not everyone is like that, but and there are dudes who are like, yeah, I don't know how to do anything better. I would do something better if I could figure it out. But like, there are dudes who are totally honest and self-aware like that. But there are a lot of guys that will just flatter themselves and make this like world of like, no, being exactly what I am is the best thing to be, and so it's. Yeah, and like I said, he was explaining that they do that, but also kind of doing it at the same time. I mean, the whole thing is really a self-explanation. Like, this is why being a philosopher is better than the other things.
There's two things I want to say to that. First of all, there's all kinds of careers you can find where people went into it not understanding the career, and then they became disillusioned with it. Like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. Right. And one of the fields where that happens sometimes is philosophy. There are people who go into philosophy and then become disillusioned. But this is just like head in the clouds nonsense. I'd be better off being like an auto mechanic or something.
Right.
However, there was a funny back and forth between two guys I used to listen to. I should listen to them more. David Pizarro and Tamler Summers talking about variously deconstructing their own fields of psychology and philosophy, going over all the bad papers, the reproducibility crisis, and psychology in particular. Right. And David Pizarro, the psychologist, was complaining, and he said, man, when you deconstruct psychology and you find it's a bunch of bullshit and you're a psychologist, you have nothing left. But if you deconstruct philosophy and say it's a bunch of bullshit, you're still doing philosophy. which Tamler Summers said, time to join the party, man.
That is true. I mean, you never run out of. You just created a new problem for you to solve in philosophy.
Well, and I mean, I think the short, quick answer is maybe so long as you're, being mindful of what is actually valuable in life,
right?
Whether that is becoming an academic philosopher, or maybe it's just being an auto mechanic, or just being an auto mechanic, as if we're presuming that's inferior somehow. Right. If you're asking the question and you're pursuing value in the world in a more conscious and thoughtful manner, you're less likely to be led astray perhaps by images, whether those are marketers or your own impulses. And you can achieve a higher degree of agency and higher degree of freedom and perhaps a higher degree of satisfaction with your life at the end of things, and avoid the fate of Cephalus's friends who reached old age and were like, oh, this is miserable. Which is perhaps what this was all about to begin with.
Yeah. But there's also, you can go down rabbit holes of like, what is happiness and fulfillment, and what's the difference, and
sure,
and that's going to be different for a lot of different people. People want different things. I've met people, as I said, one of my favorite things, talking to Greg Hamilton back in the day, when he would run all these World War II reenactment things.
Yeah.
And he was just always amazed that someone wanted to be the cook. He just assumed because he was a special forces guy. He just assumed that everyone wants to be like the special forces guy in the reenactment, at least, right? You don't have to go through the process. You just get to play the special forces guy. He's like, no, some guy actually just wants to be the cook, and that like blew him away. He like couldn't figure it. Was like a mind for him that like someone would want that, but that's true. I mean, in life, people like doing different things. They get fulfillment and enjoyment out of doing different things. And that's not the idea that, like there's this hierarchy of things that are worthwhile or fulfilling is maybe a little bit of an illusion too. But do we have any more comments?
No, that's it for YouTube.
Weird, because we have like a lot of viewers, actually. Like, for this actual episode, there's a lot of people watching. So yeah, if you have any comments or questions, jump in, because it's a like I said, this one it'd be good to go back over. I may go back over it at some point, just in some other ideas that I'm looking for, like in terms of like I'm toying with the idea by writing a book about virtue. I mean, I'm just kicking it around in my head. Actually, the other thing is, Chris, you were busy all week with work, but the First Men were talking about free will and fate like for days. We had a really good discussion going about the whole thing. I mean, you can probably scroll through some of it because it's like there for 10 days, I think. But like everybody was getting really into it, going back and forth and talking about the concept of free will and fate and all that stuff. And so it became it was a pretty good discussion. So it's been kind of a theme all week. Except for I ruined it with a meme today, but other than that, it's been a pretty good. It's been a pretty good discussion. And also, I have to say, this looks pretty good on film. Like I have to this. We'll get these soon. Obviously, it's mirrored because I guess I mirrored my screen. But I got some Stay Solar hats coming that I'm having manufactured, and this is the prototype, so they should be here soon. And then this, I need one more prototype on this. As you can see, even on my arms, it needs to be taken in about a ½ inch on the arms to be properly tight. And I'm having it. But this is the first order of man. Order of somebody else's brand. This is the first Order of Fire shirt that we're putting together. So I made it because I wanted it, and nobody's been able to make it over the past few years that I've been looking for it. So I'm like, I'm just gonna have it made and then sell 100 of them. So I'm excited to see. It looks really crisp, and so I'm excited about that. But cool.
Nice.
All right.
It looks good. I'll have to get one.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about it. I'm excited the way it looks. So, but anyway, cool. Do we have any other comments, or are we done?
No, I think that's it. It's a sort of a quiet evening today. It must be,
at least in comments. But yeah, it's a lot of people. A lot of people watching. Maybe they're haters. I don't know. Maybe we have haters today. like they're like typing to each other and saying what they're going to say mean about me later. Also YouTube comments. Not in our group that we get here, but it's just I've been doing shorts lately. Like that's been my job for the past one of my jobs for the past few weeks is to put out some shorts. I need to get my name kind of out there and get some stuff promoted. And so I'm putting them on all these different platforms. It's just interested to see what works on different platforms. Like I'm doing the same stuff on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. And so I'm putting these YouTube shorts out, and like the YouTube comments to the shorts are retarded. Like they're the most retarded.
Well, I mean, not to bring it back to the subject at hand, but it reminds me of Plato's repeated invocations of the importance that the philosopher king be patient and strong, not just in body but in mind, being able to bear the weight of long and sometimes tedious arguments. And the proof of the value of the philosopher kings in the study of the mathematics and the tedium of mathematics is the demonstration of their weight. And I feel like long form content on YouTube attracts a slightly different audience than the short form content. And so
totally.
The more you can push yourself, restrain yourself from watching too many Instagram reels or YouTube shorts or TikTok talks or whatever they're called, ticks.
I don't know what they're called.
Ticks. We'll call them ticks.
Yeah.
They're like little
ticks,
bloodsuckers that take your life.
Brain suckers, yes.
Minute by minute or second by second. Like those, if you can restrain yourself from that and make an effort to do a little bit more long form content, or better and more challenging yet, maybe read. It's like you might be moving yourself like Adeimantus moving up we go, as Michael Screw would say, from the oligarchical man to the timocratic man. Up we go. Glaucon goes from the timocratic man to the philosophical man. You can not everybody can be the highest level of anything, whether that's wealth, because wealth is great, honor is great, all these things are great, but you can move up a level. Well, I am, I do not have the genetics to be a, freaking strongman, but I can lift a slightly heavier weight than I can last year,
Right.
And you can move up in the world. And we'll get more to that in book 10, which concludes with a really stunning myth that throws back to the myth of Gyges in some ways. But
Nice.
we'll get to that next week.
I really like this form, like of myth writing as philosophy.
Yeah.
I like it better than the dialogue, frankly. But I'm doing that this week, and it's like kind of the most fun I've had writing a while. It's the closest I've gotten to fiction in a long time. I'm writing this I guess fable or something that has a philosophical basis for it. And I won't ruin it because it's cool, and I already have things scheduled to come out around it. But it's been the idea of being able to talk about things in symbols and put dialogue into the mouths of this one or two like characters, like mine is a tiger that I'm talking through, and to have little asides in there even like that, like I have this moment where I'm like he's meditating on nonviolence because he heard that was what he's supposed to do, and he's meditating on nonviolence, and he's thinking and he's like, it's very difficult to meditate on a thing that is the absence of something, and it's almost like an ellipsis, like a space between. I'm like, I'm becoming too philosophical. I will get back to meditating. like I just get a little aside. I made myself laugh with it, but this tiger trying to meditate. But wait, how do you meditate on a thing that's not there? But anyway, but yeah. So is there any more questions? Or are we done?
Matthew Seneca says, I certainly didn't come to class prepared today. That's fine. None of us are with Plato. Plato is a sort of initiation into the questions. No one knows for sure what he's talking about, but he's inviting us to try to figure it out. So that's okay. You're here going it over with us. And if we are of a good Socratic spirit, we should be saying we don't know either. And we should maybe be careful talking about things of which we ourselves are not totally sure. But, it does appear that some interpretations might be better than others, at the very least.
Yeah, and keep in mind, too, for people watching who haven't caught up with the reading, that we have it in a playlist on the Order of Fire YouTube channel. And so there's a playlist for this. So the idea of doing this was not so that it'd be just one-off live shows, but that, for people who enjoy these kind of conversations, if you wanted to study the Republic and go through it and then listen to our clever banter about it, and Chris's great summaries of things, because he's doing a good short summaries at the beginning that kind of walk people through, like, this is what you just heard, or if you're listening to it on audiobook, or this is what you just read, because it takes a while, like you said, a few times to go through. I actually did also listen to the Segru thing this morning, so I got your joke about Up We Go, because he does that in that, because that's a good, like, the Segru things are a good introduction, just to be like, okay, what am I about to read, like, what is this about, so in the short form, so I can, like, okay,
at the risk of sounding like a democratical man, what is everybody else talking about in relation to the Republic?
Yeah, it's like going through the Cliff Notes. Like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. All right. And then you can go back and find your own interpretation and be like, I don't actually agree with that. Or like, I got something else out of it that was, or, because, different man, different water, all that. At a different time in life, you're seeing a different thing that's more important to you at that particular time. So you get a different influence. But, it's good to know, like, what other people were getting out of it. Especially with a book like this, where it's been written about for, like, forever. It's good to actually, like, hear what other people are thinking. And then, obviously, like a Michael Sugrue has a different, just philosophical and political, probably, standpoint than we do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can take it a different way. It's kind of like, and you can decide whether you think we're full of shit or he's full of shit. But like, or maybe both of us are kind of, So and if you think both of us are kind of, that means you're probably thinking. So that's good. so I mean that's a good thing. But anyway, after that, I'll just wrap it up then. So if we don't have any more questions,
Sure.
we had like a ton last week, and then less this week. But maybe it's because we did 2 books at once. I don't know. Maybe everybody's like behind. But anyway, but yeah, thanks everybody for watching along, and obviously we are accepting applications for the Order of Fire's First Men group. I try to separate them. I've tried to explain this in a video that I uploaded in the sense that the Order of Fire, I want it to be a bigger thing that a lot of people can identify with, and you don't have to be in the group or whatever because there's membership dues and some people don't have that, or they live in a country where that's like not feasible or whatever. And what we're doing, if you like what we're doing, you're part of the Order of Fire. And if you want to be part of our inside group, like where we were discussing all this stuff all week long, a whole bunch of guys were like digging into this really deep and having a lot of fun with it and joking around, but also that's where my joke, I said that if free will doesn't exist, then Sam Harris was always going to be a cunt. Like he had no choice. Like he was always going to be a cunt. Like that's where that came from as we were discussing that. It was coming through that whole lens. So we're having a lot of really cool discussions right now, and having some events. We're going to go out and shoot and do ritual out here in a few weeks. They're getting together in the East Coast, and it's a really interesting group of dudes to be connected with on a daily basis. It's just been exciting, and the discussions have been rolling without me pushing them lately, and that's been really cool. And I've been hoping for that to happen for a long time, and it finally is. So we're like catching our stride, I think, as a group, which is exciting. So if you're interested in that, there's go to theorderfire.com. That's our store, and our there's a space for an application on there. So,
and most of the conversations, we have our nerdy conversations like these. Most of the conversations are more jiu-jitsu, lifting. We've got a style section now. I just saw that recently, talking about like.
Well, it's just aesthetics. It's like aesthetics generally. So like people post art, and then like they'll talk about whatever they want to in terms of aesthetics. So like sometimes it's like how like dudes have been talking about jewelry. They like what's masculine jewelry and what's like not. So that we were talking about that. So yeah, we're about that, and then of course like I think our firearm section is like the busiest one that we have, which is cool.
I'm still waiting for Jeremy to drop his painting technique for his rifle and magazines. It blows my stuff out of the water. It is so professional, so good.
Nice.
I might do that for my next weapon when I save up for it, but we'll see.
Yeah, and actually Nick joined today.
Cool, fantastic.
Yeah, so and I know he went to school to be a gunsmith. So there's that.
Yes.
So that's that. That's another guy we have who's on that page in there.
Fantastic.
So cool. All right. Well, thank you all for listening and watching, and we'll get the audio up soon.
Yeah, and congratulations for working through this very heavy and difficult but tremendously worthwhile book. It's the value, you won't even feel half the value 5 years from now for all the things that are coming out of this. It touches on so many different things as Jack has commented, and every time you read it you're like, oh, this is like that thing that's happening in the real world over here, or here's that reference I keep hearing to this other thing. Lord of the Rings now looks different. It's such a worthwhile undertaking. So congratulations for working through. I assume if you've got to 8 and 9, you'll probably get through 10 as well. So
yeah, you're in the home stretch now.
Yeah.
So cool, guys. All right, thanks everybody. Till next time, stay solar.
Stay solar.